I could not hear anything. I'd be watching John's ass, Paul's ass, his foot tapping, his head's nodding, to see where we were in the song.
And that's a clip, obviously, from The Beatles, 8 days a week, the touring years. Ron Howard, it's your picture. How are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you.
It's a lot of punctuation in...
You know what? When we began screening the movie, it was so important to make sure audiences understood that we were only looking at the touring years. Because, of course, the Beatles story is epic, yes, and it goes on, and we all know it goes on. I really like the fact that what the band wanted to do and what Apple Records wanted to do is focus on the touring years, because it made it kind of an adventure story. But it was also vitally important that an audience not going there expecting to see, the full, yes, epic.
Was that always your intention to tell this part of the story through the touring years, or did that kind of emerge as you went through the material?
Well, it was the only mandate really handed to me. They over some years, they had collected more and more fan footage, archival footage that other people had seen either very little of or not at all. And also these bootleg soundboards that they'd come up with. And they felt like Giles Martin, who works here at Abbey Road all the time, George Martin's son, felt he could digitize that and do a lot to make audiences sort of feel the live experience in a way that they hadn't been able to before. So that was the jumping off place. They wanted to focus on the live years. And at first I thought, well, that may be problematic. And the more I began to read about them, talk to them a little bit, understand, I began to see sort of my director's movie mindset came into focus, and I felt like there's an adventure story there. By dealing with Beatlemania and everything that went with it, and the ups and downs of that tumultuous period, both socially and sort of in their own experience as individuals and as a group, that was a little like Das Boot or Apollo 13.
Well, you've said before that you got into an Apollo 13 mindset to approach this. Can you explain just a little bit more about what that means?
When you begin reading about sort of the number of areas that they were pioneering, and you take into account their age and the fact that nobody knew what it was to do a stadium rock and roll tour. Nobody knew what it was to jump on an airplane and go to the Philippines or Japan and play gigs, and nobody knew what it was to become so politically controversial when you're in the middle of trying to build a career in pop music. And I don't think anybody has done all of that and managed to grow artistically along the way, which they did in leaps and bounds. That's what really kind of blew my mind as much as anything else. So I felt like that was the story to tell.
It's an absolutely fantastic picture. I mean, I believe in the fact you shouldn't speak during a movie. Right? I just think we have a code of conduct on the program, and when the movie's running, you don't talk, you don't eat, you don't drink, all that kind of stuff.
Bless you.
But after 20 minutes of in fact probably less, I leant over to our producer who I was watching the movie with. I said, "This is fantastic."
Oh, thank you.
It's just a blast, and the story that you tell is wonderful. The music heard through a decent sound system. I mean, how many times has anyone gone to the movies, this new generation or the previous generation, seen the Beatles up close, digitized, fantastic sound? I mean, it's just something that we haven't seen before. Yeah.
Well, it was...
I realize that's not a question, by the way.
Well, it was the thing I sort of counted on to, because it's daunting, to come along and say, I'll take responsibility for this movie, and I had the final cut and all the controls that I'd want to have for any movie. I pitched my version to Yoko and Olivia Harrison and of course to Ringo and to Sir Paul, and so they knew what it was, and they had to sign off on that. What my approach was going to be, but still it was. How are we going to get this to really fulfill people's expectations for a movie like this?
So
and
it's still that democracy, because there's a moment in the movie
yeah.
where it's very clear that all the decisions have to be taken by all four, and so clearly a version of that is still in place. Everyone.
Yeah, and it's not a rubber stamp thing. I mean, within any business that involves the Beatles, it's 4 votes.
Can I ask you about one specific thing in the movie, and that is the way race comes up a lot. So you certainly get a feel of the chaos of mid-'60s America with Vietnam and the JFK assassination, and then John saying more famous than Jesus, and all that kind of craziness that was going on. And I knew about that. I didn't know that they had in their contracts that line that said they wouldn't play to segregated audiences. Did you know that? Was that well known when you started this project?
No, that was not well known. I didn't even know about Jacksonville. Now people who are encyclopedic about the Beatles do. But as we began to delve further into the story, I began to realize what a stand they'd taken. And yes, they'd formalized it in their contract.
And this was Jacksonville was the gig where they said we're not playing to a segregated audience.
And they just thought it was ludicrous. And and then we found really the last big idea to come into our documentary was finding Kitty Oliver, who was there, African American woman, who dared to go and spoke about it with us, and it means a lot. Look, the band operated with a kind of an audacity and a commitment to their ideas, whether they were creative or just the life principles. And this is, if there's a surprise for me or a lesson or it's that I think their work endures because there's just something very pure about it, and it is a reflection of just who they were.
That very kind of British approach, which is, well, that's stupid.
Yes, yeah.
Why
would you do that?
Why would we do that? And Whoopi Goldberg. So you have a number of talking heads who come in, Elvis Costello and Eddie Izzard, and then Whoopi Goldberg comes in and she says when she was watching, I think she was watching the Ed Sullivan Show, that first recording in '64, which you were watching as well as a young lad, that there was something about them that they weren't white, and they weren't black, they were just the Beatles. And again, you're thinking, well, I never even got a handle on that.
Me neither. And it was really interesting. I've known Whoopi Goldberg over the years, and she's a part of a talk show in the U.S. called The View. And I went on her show one day, and backstage, she was saying, "Well, what have you got coming up?" And I said, "Well, I've got Inferno with Tom Hanks, another of the Dan Brown mysteries, and that's coming out, and I'm having a good time with that. And meanwhile, while I do all of this, I'm continually working on this Beatles documentary, and it's really fascinating." And she said, "The Beatles," and she grabbed my hand, and she told this story. And backstage, before we're supposed to go out and do this bouncy interview, she was getting kind of emotional about it. And I said, "Can we get our cameras in, and will you tell it again?" And I was really glad to have that opportunity.
I was telling my daughter that about this movie, and she said, "Wow, I've seen the trailer. I just wish I was alive then." And she's a whole lot younger than I was. And that's what people will feel, I think, going to see this movie, that it's a slice of life which has been denied to them before. Yeah. Was there a moment, was there a slice of archive which you got hold of it, which particularly pleased you, which particularly surprised you, thought, great, we haven't had that part of the story before?
Well, there were a lot of them, and as I began to focus sort of the narrative that I wanted to apply to the movie, and working with our team, Mark Monroe, the writer, and Paul Crowder, the editor, and Nigel Sinclair, the producer, we'd begin to look at things, and suddenly, like, we'd look at the footage in Japan, and we'd have a quote from Ringo saying, it was getting exhausting, and we were beginning to wonder how much longer this was going to go on, or whatever that quote was, and we found this shot of Ringo playing. He looks absolutely ill. I'm sure he was jet lagged, who knows what, not well, playing, and he's just got this sour look on his face compared to the exuberance of Washington, D.C., where he's just, right after the Ed Sullivan Show, and he's just a man on fire. Well, you may have seen that shot before, but you've never seen it in the context of what we were trying to tell, which is the wear and tear of navigating Beatlemania.
Is there another Beatles documentary to be made?
Well, there's certainly more story there, and as this one began with them deciding, all four of them, yes, let's look at a part of our lives and explore making a movie about it. I think they'd have to make that decision all over again. But of course, there's more to the journey, and it's a fascinating one. It's a revealing one. The other advantage that I thought this movie might have being made today, that I hung my hat on as a director, was that now looking at the band with this perspective, and Paul and Ringo being able to look back on it, if they were willing, that they could offer insights that they might not have been willing to before, and I really think they did. I didn't even ask for it. We just began the conversations. There were 2 interviews each. And I will never ever forget those interviews, and they meant a lot to the film.
I'm going to try one question, which is in your film, which is fired at Paul. A lot of the interviews that are in they're kind of crazy interviews, and they were difficult to interview, the guys. But someone says to Paul, "What is the Beatles' place in world culture?" Or some extraordinary question like that. And he says, "Oh, we're just having a laugh."
He said, "Culture, it's not culture. It's a laugh."
So now I'm asking you, Ron Howard, with the advantage of time, can you give a better answer than that, other than having a laugh?
No, and I love that about them. And again, it's it's not only English. Maybe they feel there's something about their sort of Liverpool background and a kind of an unpretentiousness about that made it possible for them to always look at the world that way and never take themselves too seriously. And yet they were absolutely serious artists, and that evolved and grew. And I think that's the interesting paradox of who they are, and why their music endures. I mean, as I began to think about it, I thought, wow. It wasn't just that they became so famous then, and so therefore we want to keep listening to them. Their songs are great, and I was going through and revisiting them, and then I thought, man, there's not a mood or a frame of mind that you could have where a Beatles song would not speak to you in a very personal way, and that's a great testament to their writing, and I think they were great, great writers.
Ron Howard, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you very much.
Thanks, fun, pleasure.